Okay, in this video we're going to go through the remaining techniques and strategies for health education. So another method would be models. So those are great visual aids for instruction. You can have anatomical facsimiles. So for example, again, kind of going back to condom use. When I was doing health education and providing HIV health education, I had different condom or different penis models that people would put the condoms on as a way of demonstrating. And it was helpful, I think, to be realistic with that. A lot of health educators at that point were using like bananas to put the condoms on, and what it did was it just really, in many cases, actually made people feel more uncomfortable than using something that simulated what they might be experiencing. Another model that I've used before are model communities, where if we're talking about a healthy community, I'll have people build a community with different kinds of things that I might have at home. So it's a way to make a point and to visually draw people in. So provide some variety. It gives people some hands-on experience. It can be good attention getters. And it helps to be more meaningful sometimes than just a picture. But it does require equipment. It can be expensive, and it requires extra setup for you. So in order to do this effectively, you want to make sure that you display the models in a way that really helps to spark interest. People should be able to see it, and so that way everybody in your audience can learn from it. Then make sure that, try to avoid like passing the item while you're talking, because that creates some distraction and it's hard to get people's attention back. And make sure that you might want to like present your content in advance, so that way if people get distracted they can get right back on board. Another method would be music. So I have to say this is not a method I've used very often, but that could be a technique that people might want to use, like in terms of stress reduction. I've definitely talked about music when I've talked about stress management, and how a lot of times we'll have playlists to go with our emotions. And so like if you need to get pumped up or something, you might have a playlist. If you're just broke up with somebody, you might have a very sad Disney themed playlist. So we can use music in lots of different ways. It can create a nice background. Sometimes it can draw, another way to draw attention to a message, and it can create a special mood. Particularly, like you could also use it with like a media campaign or something like that. So it can be low cost. And it can be used to help discuss certain issues. It's great for setting a mood, and it allows people to express themselves individually, which is nice. It does require equipment, and so that can be hard sometimes to get or to move. Sometimes it's hard to find the right music, and it also, because of different people's tastes, it can be difficult to appeal to everybody. So definitely review in advance and make sure that you've got it queued up so it's at the right volume. Newsletters are another method, and it's a great way to get a lot of information out to a lot of people. And it can be cost effective, especially with certain services that are available now, like MailChimp or that sort of thing. So you can get a lot of information out. You can really target people's specific needs. For example, if you're providing information to students who are part of the fraternity and sorority system, you can have a special newsletter just for them. You can reinforce information that was previously presented, and it can also serve as a reminder, like if you have like a event that you want to encourage people to go to, like a DUI awareness day or something like that. If you're using paper form, which hardly anybody does anymore, but it can be expensive, and then if you're using electronic, then or if you're even doing a paper version, either way, you should probably have a computer. It can be time consuming, and you need to have some level of expertise. Otherwise, you're, just like with the bulletin boards that we talked about earlier, you're not going to be able to really engage your audience if you don't have some level of expertise in terms of how it's even put together. So you want to make sure that you do this as part of your program. It won't be your entire educational intervention. If you do deliver newsletters, your chapter is suggesting to do it as a single item. So you can do bulk distribution though as well. Another method would be panels. So a panel is a great way to bring out different views and different opinions, different experiences. It can be used in a school setting. It can also be used in a community setting. And it gives you members who might have different experiences, who are credible and have different expertise and can be compatible. So for example, a panel, I'm trying to think of my most recent panel. The most recent panel I was on childhood obesity, where I talked about what was going on countywide when it came to addressing childhood obesity. There was also a doctor who talked about it from a medical view. There was also a school administrator who focuses on physical activity. So we weren't in disagreement with one another, but we each brought a different perspective to the conversation. So you can hear some different opinions. Sometimes it can also allow for some debate if you want that. And it allows people to hear from different voices, which keeps your audience engaged and keeps them from getting bored. Sometimes it's hard to get the right mix of people together, and particularly if people don't know each other well, sometimes people get competitive. Sometimes too, there's not really closure, so for you would need to really make sure that you're facilitating effectively to bring your panel to conclusion, and to make sure that people aren't just hearing different views, but that you bring it together in a meaningful way. Sometimes the panel members can get off track, and that can create time constraints. It also can get people off message. And then sometimes like their personalities really dilute what it is that you're trying to get across educationally. It can feel disorganized, and so again, your job as a health educator, as a facilitator, is to be a good moderator. So a panel can be enhanced by having the participants think in advance of knowing what the audience wants to know, and knowing what they want to learn, and so to make sure that your panelists also know in advance what your audience may already know, so that way they don't reiterate things that you may have already covered, or experiences that people already come to in your class. Another method is peer education. You guys have a strong peer health education program here at Cal State Fullerton. In fact, some of you who are in this class may be participating as peer health educators. And so it consists of people who will usually present workshops to the peers. It can be really effective in getting, if people feel like, oh, well, why are you saying that? Because you don't really understand what it's like to be me. Well, if you're a peer, you understand very well what it's like to be that individual. And so it helps people to identify and makes it relatable. So it can provide a good modeling experience. The peers usually can get to the audience a little bit easier. An example was when I was doing prison outreach. I had a peer health education program out at the prison, and all of my peer health educators were inmates, and my inmates were actually doing life sentences. So they knew the prison yard well. It was an HIV intervention, so they knew who was using drugs. They knew kind of all the ins and outs of the prison yard, so they really helped my intervention to get to the right people who needed to hear it the most. It also can provide informal education. So, we would do the presentation, but then these same women would be out on the prison yard later on, so they can reinforce the education as well. And so they can be influential in a way that us as professionals might not be able to. And it really gives the peer health educators themselves the opportunity for growth. the disadvantage is that because they're peers, they may not have the credibility with the audience. They might also provide inaccurate information or get into like sharing a lot of personal experiences or personal opinions. And particularly if you're providing an intervention that's very technical. For example, if you were, providing how to test your insulin, that has to be right. It can't be, based on peer perception. It has to be entirely accurate. So involve your peer health educators in the planning process. Make sure that you give them adequate training, and really have some criteria set up beforehand to make sure that they're going to fulfill what you need for them to do. And also, this is a great way to, if you don't have staff, it's a great way to get more bodies out there to do the work that needs to be done. So another method is personal improvement projects. I often say that all of health education is my own personal improvement project. But it's a great way to help people work on their own behaviors. It can be humbling for us as health educators to have our own personal improvement projects, because it reminds us that what we're asking other people to do is sometimes challenging. And so it gives them a chance to try stuff out. So this might be like an example of a personal improvement project might be keeping a food diary or helping people to quit smoking. So it gives people their own objectives. They can chart that, they can look at their progress, and they can use some kind of diary or log to explain that progress. So it's low in cost. It helps people to directly influence their behavior. You target specific needs, and you can reinforce aspects of your program. You also get people actively involved in their own health, and it allows individuals to personalize what it is that you're trying to do. It does require a lot of individual attention, however, and it can be difficult to achieve because it's very individually focused. It can require a lot of time and a lot of paperwork, and it may not be enough to motivate everybody. So you want to make sure that you give enough instruction and support at the beginning. Give people enough time, and then give them a way to analyze their progress. So that might be a diary. It can also be an app like MyFitnessPal or something like that. And encourage people to share their outcomes, but don't require it because of privacy. So another method is problem solving. And so you want to set this up by using scenarios. You give people circumstances and then help them to literally figure out how they're going to solve that problem. So for example, if you're trying to get people to eat healthier, so when I do nutrition for a wellness program at work, one of the things that I do is problem solving around food preparation. So people might be running late from a meeting, they don't have time to go out and get food, so what are some ways to problem solve that? So it gives people some discussion, and also gives people the chance to analyze the situation from multiple points of view. So it can create a nice environment where people can ask questions. It can also demonstrate that there's no one way to solve a problem. You need to set the ground rules in advance, and also develop your strategies for questioning. And it can really help people to develop those higher thinking skills. It can be time consuming, however, and people can be uncomfortable when they realize that there's no clear right answer to solving a problem. And so sometimes that can result in personal conflicts. So you want to make sure that you give them in advance a list of questions to consider, and just select the problems that really are relevant to your objectives for your program. So another method is puppets. This is a method I have never in almost 30 years of health education used, but if you're working with little kids, they can be really cool. Um, they don't cost a lot of money, and you can even make them yourselves. They can also be a good icebreaker, team builder. They can be entertaining. It can be a way to address difficult topics without putting people on the spot, right? Because you got the puppet talking and not the person with the problematic behavior. It also helps people to maybe like express their feelings without fear of retribution or something like that. And it can also help with creative thinking and oral communication. However, if people don't participate, it's not going to work. And sometimes it can bring out like unintended emotions or outcomes. You really know as a facilitator, you need to be on top of your game and know in advance all the different outcomes that may occur. Some people might find it to be threatening. It can be used with adults, but think about if somebody was going to use a puppet with you, if that would be something you'd be comfortable with. You may be best just saving it for the little ones. And if you're trying to focus on your script, then manipulating the puppets can be hard. So just bring the puppets to life. Just if you're going to use this method, make sure that you're keeping it very real. Make sure that you use voice inflection and exaggerated movements. Make sure that you're well scripted in this. And you as a facilitator may be the narrator and other people may be working with the puppets. Make sure that your puppeteers really practice and have a good script. And then set the stage, make sure you have a stage, and make sure that you use lots and lots of repetition with this. Role plays are another great way to get people to identify with attitudes and feelings. There's no script for this like there would be with the puppets, but you want to set it up in advance. And it allows people to kind of safely discover how they might react in a particular situation. So the upside to it is there's no equipment. You can address some difficult topics. For example, role plays that I've used, definitely lots of role plays around condom negotiation, role plays around getting people not to drive when they've been drunk. So it gives people a chance to really rehearse their skills. They can also sometimes experience their feelings without fears of retribution. And it can be interesting and entertaining. If people aren't into it, it's not going to work. It also can bring out some unintended emotions. You, as the facilitator, have to be super well prepared in advance and be able to shift and twist and turn depending on what happens. They can be really difficult to control. Your audience members might be sarcastic and not take it very seriously. Sometimes people throw in some misinformation, and it also results in if your people aren't involved in the role plays, they are in a pretty passive situation, and sometimes that's not great for them. So just make sure that you establish the rules in advance. That the actors are acting out assigned roles, no put downs, no stereotyping. Make sure that you provide these clear parameters, and that in real life there might be more than one way of carrying out a role. Make sure that you're strong in the debrief. So don't just like role play and go, okay, thanks, we're done now with the role play. You want to make sure that you're strong in the debriefing on it, so that way people learn from what it is that you were trying to do. Speaking of debriefing, is very important. So use the debrief to correct any misinformation, and then analyze any roles for what was real, right? And then get feedback about whether or not the role play was handled in a realistic and appropriate way. It gives you a chance to also talk about alternatives. So what would be another way that we might go about solving this problem? Or what are some other things you've heard people say under these circumstances? And so it allows you to really promote some discussion. Another method is self-appraisal. So it gives people a chance to do some personal assessment. It really encourages some introspection and some self-inspection. This is great with the self-improvement, the personal improvement projects that we talked about a little bit ago, and it also can be a great evaluation strategy. The advantages are that it allows for individual assessment. It can also be that first prompt in like promoting some level of ambivalence. So if you're thinking about like Prochaska and stages of change, or the trans-theoretical model, it can sometimes be the first step in that. It's a great way to start a class because it gets people already thinking, and it can be entertaining and interesting. However, it does require you to use some kinds of instruments or tools. It can be misinterpreted. It may require medical testing, which you as a health educator may not have access to. It can be expensive, and it's self-reported, so therefore people may not give accurate information. So you just want to make sure that you encourage participants to summarize what they've learned, allow for that self-reflection, and use it also with some goal setting. Service learning is another great strategy for health education. And so it's the notion that people learn from doing. We had a really effective service learning project recently in Santa Ana with a nonprofit organization called KidWorks. They did a service learning project around bikeability, and it resulted in the high school students actually getting some grant money for the city of Santa Ana. So it provides a real service. It also gives individuals a chance to rehearse and get some skills, as well as give back to the community. So advantages are very little equipment, usually no equipment. You can address your learning objectives effectively, and it gives back to the community. It can be unpredictable. Sometimes it requires insurance or puts people at risk, and it really requires close supervision and mentoring in order to be effective. So make sure that that your individuals have instructions, they know their responsibilities, that this is all thought out in advance. Give them the supplies that they need. So for example, for the project in Santa Ana, we did some training on bike assessments, and then we provided them with the actual assessment forms, went out with them with cameras, that sort of thing. And then definitely hold a debriefing session, so that way you can hear what people learned, and so they can hear from one another, and that potentiates the learning. Another method is simulations. This, again, kind of takes on like a real life sort of situation. It allows your participants to learn, and they can have like a real life experience without being at risk for injury or getting a disease or something like that. It can also stimulate critical thinking, and it allows people to also experience the emotions that they might feel in a real situation. So it gives some element of realism. It can help you with your difficult to teach topics. It also gives you a little bit of variety in the mix, and you can reinforce some important skills. It can be time consuming, it can be expensive. It's difficult sometimes with big groups, and also requires that you prepare in advance. So you want to make sure that you know what you wish to accomplish, that you really prepare so you're minimizing the risk of uncertainties, and definitely use it as an opportunity to increase self-efficacy. So set it up so that way people can get those experiences, so they can improve that confidence and that belief in themselves. And then to make sure that you keep it kind of as realistic as possible. Another method is storytelling. And so storytelling is kind of like a method that we talked about in part A, and that's case studies. So it can be used as a great teaching tool. You hear me tell stories a lot. I like to tell stories because I think it helps to provide real life examples of things that people might experience. And if you become effective in storytelling, then you'll draw your learner in, and they'll hang in there with you because they want to see how the story unfolds. So they can be entertaining and interesting. There's no equipment that's required. You can address difficult topics, and people are likely to pass the stories on. I have heard other people giving presentations and using stories that I've told, interestingly, as their stories, but that's fine. It reinforces an opportunity to listen. Disadvantages is that you really have to have good, strong public speaking skills. It can have unpredictable outcomes because your audience may not be engaged in your story. If your audience can't make the connection, then it's really a missed opportunity. And if the stories aren't real, it can be rather time consuming to create. So you want to make sure that remember that storytelling is only effective if there's a decent discussion that follows it. Use stories that have repetition and pleasing words for younger learners. For adult learners, we like stories that have action, humor, suspense. We want to know what's going to happen next. Develop a clear outline so that way your story flows, and then practice telling it. And then use your natural voice. So don't use a voice that's contrived or something like that, because you'll disengage your audience. Another method is computer-assisted learning. And so it can be used really at any time, and it can be used with other teaching techniques. There's lots of apps and lots of software that can make this strategy work. And it's something that you can use in both school and in community settings. So it can provide an element of fun. An example of computer-based learning that I used back when I was at UC Irvine was in alcohol education. There's an assessment called Electronic Checkup and Go, which was an acronym, so the acronym for that was ECHUG. And so it gave, what I did was a competition with first year students. And because I had read this study that was done at MIT, where if individuals engaged in alcohol assessment in their first, I think it was 60 days of class in their freshman years, they were less likely to experience alcohol-related harm throughout the duration of their undergraduate experience. So at a large university, I wasn't going to be able to provide alcohol assessments to all incoming freshmen. So I used electronic checkup and go. And what I found was one of the feedback methods is that people would find out what the caloric intake of their alcohol was equivalent to in cheeseburgers. And that was the piece of information that people retained the most, was cheeseburgers. So I used the computer-based learning as a chance to create a challenge called the ECHUG Cheeseburger Challenge. And so I would have people take the ECHUG assessment, do reflection questions, and then the resident halls that had the greatest level of participation, I surprised them by working with their RAs, and we would deliver In-N-Out burgers from the back of a squad car. We would come to their resident halls with In-N-Out burgers, so that way to reward them for taking the challenge. So it can be innovative, it can provide some variety, learners are actively involved, and it gives you pretty quick feedback. Can be expensive, requires special equipment or software or apps. If people don't know how to use a computer, it can be a problem. If somebody isn't comfortable with computers or with apps, it can be disengaging. And if you don't have something like I did for ECHUG that I could just walk right into, I would never be able to create something like that. Another method is theater. So throughout the years, there's been a number of theater type programs that have been developed to address health education issues, such as teen pregnancy, sexual assault, what else am I forgetting? Sexually transmitted diseases. So it differs from role play because it's scripted, and you can also purchase like a script from a company. I purchased a script that addressed first year college students when I was at UCI, and we had actors that did that. Usually there's, if you're going to use this for health education, you want some kind of follow-up dialogue. So not usually a lot of equipment. It's a great way to address difficult topics in a controlled manner. It gets at the emotions and allows for you to have control over the content because it is scripted. It requires the use of actors, but you can also use pure health educators. We did readers theater, which was a lot easier, and people still really liked it. It may require a stage or equipment, and if people are really bad actors, then it's going to distract from what it is that you're trying to do. So just make sure that you use health-specific scripts, and you can even do this as a class project. They can be used with community groups. Make sure that your actors have good props, and make sure that your actors understand what the objectives are. Another method that has really kind of fallen out of favor is values clarification. So it helps people to understand how they may have reached decisions. And so it helps people with their decision-making model. It was really popular like in the 60s and 70s, but more and more evidence has shown that this is actually not necessarily an effective method. It's particularly not effective as a standalone method. So if you're going to use values clarification, you want to make sure that you're doing that in concert with some other kinds of teaching methods. So the upside is it's low cost, it deals with the feelings, and it allows for individual groups to express themselves. But it can be controversial. You as the instructor really need to be prepared with the emotional reactions. It can be very unpredictable in terms of the outcome. And if you have people who are very vocal, they can dominate and take away from the rest of the group. So just make sure that you understand the complexity of the issues and that you offer multiple perspectives. Do encourage participation from the whole group because sometimes people might be just waiting for their turn. And then encourage the participants to disagree, but in a constructive way. And for you as the facilitator have to be absolutely neutral. So complete, poker face, if you could, because you as health educators, we have values, and we're not going to walk into one of these situations not believing or caring about anything. So you need to know this isn't about you, and so you need to check that at the door. So make sure that you set up the rules. Don't put anybody down. Everybody's rights and opinions need to be respected. And another method would be word games or puzzles. That's a great way to have individual education. It's used quite often with little kids. You can do like crossword puzzles, word searches, that sort of thing. Low cost, so it can be fun. It's a good filler if you need, and it can also, if you're trying to like increase vocabulary around a particular issue, it can do that. It only addresses knowledge, so no attitudes, no skills. It does require some time to develop these things. You're going to need to be able to print them or copy them or something. And sometimes people really use this as busy work, so I would say just use this very, very sparingly. But it does, sometimes give people a chance to reinforce knowledge, and it can also be a good way to inspire teams. And that is it. So those are a lot of methods, I know, and you use those carefully and effectively, and think of them particularly for assignment 3. Thanks, and have a good week.